Here's the tension that almost every funded B2B tech founder is living with right now. Your investors expect revenue growth quarter after quarter, predictable, compounding. But every time you try to scale more pipeline, more outreach, more content, the answer always comes back to the same place. We need to hire more people. And hiring is slow. It's expensive. It burns runway. And by the time a new salesperson is ramped up and producing, the quarter's already behind you. My guest today has spent, well, over the last year or so, doing something most founders are still treating as a future possibility. She's built a revenue team that runs 183 AI workers, she calls them digital workers, alongside 160 human ones inside of her company. And in 2025, that hybrid setup generated about 5 million in documented productivity impact, with projections of up to 13 million this year. But here's what makes this conversation different from every other AI episode you might have heard. This isn't a technology story, it's a management story. And the insight at the center of it will make you rethink the design of your entire revenue operation, not just which tools you're using. Lauren Esposito is the Chief Marketing Officer at Asymbl, a workforce orchestration company. Before that, she spent 13 years or so at the Salesforce, leading global brand and media strategy, including the launch of Agentforce, Salesforce's AI platform. So she knows what this looks like at an enterprise scale, and she knows what it looks like when you're building it from scratch with a lean team. Lauren, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast. Lauren, most founders I speak with frame their revenue growth problem as a capacity problem. Not enough salespeople, not enough content, not enough hours in the day. But I want to challenge that framing with you. What if the real constraint isn't capacity at all? What if the entire revenue system that most B2B tech founders have built was designed around one hidden assumption, that all workers are human? And that assumption is how now making their growth structurally unpredictable. Is that a fair diagnosis? And if so, what breaks first?
Yeah, I think every business is going through this transformation to be thinking about, right, scalability and efficiency. And with the power of AI now here, how do you do that with governance and trust and impact? And so I think exactly as you said, revenue departments were very much built with humans in mind, and scale historically has always come more bodies, right? More opportunity. Now we have intelligence, right? We have AI. It can be about finding the right opportunities that are really in the purchasing mindset, really have high interest, right? Spending time and energy in those places and finding ways for whether that's AI generative, predictive, or even workflow automation tools to help you with the in-between, right? Scarcing through, finding that talent or that pipeline, nurturing it, right? Converting it at the right moments and keeping it actively engaged. And I think the question now has become, well, do I need to grow, right, only with more humans, or can I do that with technology and AI? What are those costs going to do to my P&L over time? And the reality is you still need both. As you mentioned, Asymbl, we've got almost a 60% digital workforce now, and we specifically call it a digital workforce and not AI powered, right, automation for a reason. And that's because when we think about now what work needs to get done and the outcomes that we want to drive, higher revenue, higher conversion rates, growing into new customers and buyers, we think about what work can be done by the human and should be, because it requires that strategy, that business process, right? That creative and innovative thinking, and what work could be done by technology. Again, whether that's AI or other automated, right, solutions. And we design AI digital worker roles. We give them job descriptions, KPIs, et cetera. And so when you think about it now, the fix isn't just adding AI and saying, I've turned it on, it's now going to scale. In fact, our company is even using a lot of the Agentforce agents that are on the market today, especially for our revenue team and sales generating opportunities. And you don't just deploy this into your Salesforce instance and it works on day one. What actually changes is our operating model and the way that we think about our go-to-market. You now have to think, how do these leads come in? How do they get scored? And where do they get routed? They don't get just routed to human teams anymore or workflows. Now they're getting routed to our AI digital powered workers. How are those workers trained and enabled on all of the messaging, the product information, the pricing, right? Everything that our human employees are also enabled and trained on. How do we keep that real time and accurate? And how do we give our digital workers insights into the personalization? We have different buyers and different segments and different industries who have different pain points. We need complexity and ability for AI to scale. So it's not just take these leads, right? Send an email summary or a response to them and ask them for a meeting. There's a lot of intelligence about how the business works that you have to document and enhance and orchestrate. And then it's really the seamless workflows between those things. And so as you're thinking about how do I grow my workforce to reach the goals and the outcomes that I have and the capacity of that, there's also a lot of time and energy that goes into well, you need the right human teams who can oversee and manage, right, and orchestrate this work from an AI perspective. It is not the IT team. They don't understand the sales motion necessarily, right? It is not just an engineering play. So I think the conversation that we're having with our customers is starting to land. It's not how do I get more humans to do work? How do I get more budget, right, to scale? Or what AI should I invest in is actually, and let's take the step and let's talk about the outcomes that your business is trying to drive and then the process in which you go about to deliver on those outcomes today and back into what kind of work makes sense to start to bring in and hire AI for versus empowering and enabling your human teams to do.
So, just with the assumption that I talked about human workers, typically, what growth stage does that assumption typically start to crack?
I think now it's cracking for every growth stage, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
I think it's even more challenging for enterprise because you just have a lot of historic, right, breadth and depth going on. I think that small startups and mid-market companies, you're much more agile and nimble to go ahead and, bring AI in to scale and operationalize in a lot of ways that the security, the trust, the governance, the cost at enterprise level is actually more of a challenge.
Absolutely. You arrived at Asymbl having just watched Agentforce launch from the inside, but that having built a hybrid workforce yourself yet. What did the first 90 days of actually building one teach you that you couldn't have known from the outside?
Yeah. Being in Salesforce, the conversation was the power of what Agentforce could do. And the training was very hands-on inside of the product. You're going to go into this segment, right, of your instance. You're going to click these buttons. It's going to deploy these prompts, et cetera. But what I learned at Asymbl was the strategic, like I said, strategy behind it. So, okay, you want to have AI assisted sales reps, right? We want these digital workers in our sales team. And so we first had to set out, well, what is the challenge we're solving? Is it a conversion? Is it capacity? Is it speed? Is it a quality? We rebuilt our entire sales human workforce in the same 90 days that we built our first agent. And so we were afforded a lot of opportunities to say, what is that job description? And how am I going to measure those KPIs? What does the technology even allow me, right, to measure in terms of volume? And then thinking, where does the technology sort of fall short or where is the relationship component really important that we want to maintain a human to human opportunity, right? And not over engineer into necessarily digital workers owning everything. And so we thought about, the different trigger points that would come in and the ways that we would identify and route those leads. And then we had to sit down and think about the knowledge articles and the information and the context, as I mentioned earlier. And then we had to think about the interactions and where the work was actually happening. So it's one thing, you have to give your digital worker an email address. We had to give it access to Slack. We had to give it an ability to update account records and lead records, right? We had to give it an ability to report on itself and deliver dashboards, right? So the same kind of configuration, it was the exact same process as hiring a human person. And I think that was really insightful for me because I don't think a lot of businesses go about it that way. We tend to see IT teams saying, I've got the budget and I'm being asked to deploy it. And I don't know, there's so many, the technology is changing so fast. Providers are coming out all the time, right, with new solutions. And what I found comfort in the 90 days were, one, start where you're at because what you have access to can be, right, a value to the business and you learn a lot. I learned so much by being hands-on, not necessarily in just understanding, again, the user interface that was required to operate and engage right with my digital worker, but the process of like, building it, giving it, educating it, onboarding it, coaching it, giving it feedback, AI is a little finicky. It doesn't just follow your directions, right? Black and white, the way it writes, it thinks it's creative in some capacity. And so how to give guardrails. And then, we've got our digital worker also working in Slack, which was fun. So now we can Slack him. And Teddy is what we call him, by the way. Frank is his full name, but we call him Teddy when he's behaving, Theodore when he's not. And so we can even engage with him in Slack, asking him questions. So again, my experience was really like, this is a teammate. It's not just a piece of technology.
Here's something I constantly hear from founders, and I suspect you hear it too. They say we're too small for this. We don't have an IT team. We don't have dedicated AI operations roles. We don't have the infrastructure. What's the one belief that is keeping the exact founder who needs this the most from even starting? And is that belief actually true?
I have been shocked to actually see how many founders are not using AI on a daily basis. And so I don't know necessarily what the psychological belief is behind that, but I can tell you that that is holding them back from understanding what could be possible. And so by, if you're not testing the guardrails, and I will give a little plug for Anthropic here and say Claude is a great place, right, with all of its plugins and its connections now, to really start to say, and it takes time. I would say that maybe is the challenge for any user or leader, is to go be hands-on, to understand the capacity and the power of what sits in front of you. It's not an hour or two kind of exercise, right? It is a meaningful commitment to connect it to things, to set it up to action, ask it to take actions, deliver outcomes, to give it feedback, to coach it. So if I had anything, I would say time and prioritization are probably the things holding founders back, because I'm very fortunate to have a CEO who is very hands-on and leading the company in many ways of saying, showing what it's like to build digital workers that are helping him in his capacity and his ability to deliver what he has to do for the business. And that in turn empowers the rest of us to say, wow, there's a lot more here. And it's not just the test use cases that you might hear about. It can do a lot more that you may be saying today.
What would you say is the smallest, most concrete version of this that a, say, 15-person company could start this quarter?
Yeah, I go back to Claude again. There's a couple of things, at a 15-person company, I could imagine that planning, scale, right? Documentation, all of these things for coordination are huge. For us, we, want the idea of being able to have an automated digital worker who answers any employee questions. We have another digital worker who does all of our CEO. He's kind of like the assistant. We have another digital worker who's helping, take all the trained, this is our products, this was our best practices, right? These are our value props, et cetera, and now can write content across, any ecosystem. I'd say the most beneficial, which isn't perfect, is creating slide decks. Nobody enjoys doing that. And so we've found a lot of ways there. So there's some general, I would say, you can get started pretty easy in what I would call, some of the work basics. And then as you kind of think about your go-to-market motion, your engineering motion, your build motion, right? You now got a little bit more comfortable of understanding how to coach it, what information to give it. Now you scale it for the business, I think, in bigger and more impactful ways. Claude Code is impressive with engineering.
I want to go deep on something that I don't think gets enough airtime. When founders talk about scaling revenue, they almost always talk about strategy, their ideal customer profile, the sales motion, their content plan, etc. But you're describing something different, the actual architecture of who or what does the work that turns strategy into pipeline and pipeline into revenue. Walk me through what a well-designed revenue system looks like when it includes both human and digital workers. What does the founder who gets this right actually build?
Yeah, you're gonna build a worker's profile. And so sitting down, we get very clear about the job description and specifically the outcomes. and the measurable KPIs of that. And so if you cannot be clear about what this worker needs access to, right, how it's going to deliver on that, et cetera, that's this one. Two, every digital worker has a human manager. That human manager is responsible for one-on-one coaching, reviews, performance management, just the same way, right, that you would manage human employees. The importance of that is ensuring that during that first initial design phase, you're having someone who's taking accountability that the way that the output is going to be delivered is meaningful for the business, right, is actually going to drive someone forward and going to be something that the business needs. And then as you think about kind of like what an onboarding program might look like for a human, it's still a technical experience, but it's still a contextual experience. So from a governance and a security, just like you would with all of your other systems and admins, you have to think about what can I give this digital worker access to? We find a lot of value in, again, the fact that we have Slack or if you have Teams or one of your, kind of co-working applications that you can record your meetings, you can give transcripts, it can be in the chats with you. In addition, right, to understanding, sure, the system of record of my CRM was updated, or, right, this email was opened, or this code was deployed. And the difference between that is that a lot of technology understands what decision was made, and that's tracked and recorded. But what it misses is the in-between. Why was that decision made, right? Why did we discount this deal? Why did this deal get to go fast, right? Why did we change the strategy? Why did we rename the product? Any of those things typically are captured as data points. But in an onboarding phase, you are starting to build this like contextual brain because you're giving this digital worker access to all of this information. And then the last thing I would say is it takes the same amount of time, in my opinion, to bring a digital worker to value as it would a human employee. Sometimes you don't expect your new hires to really perform for maybe 6 months, right? Depending on the role and their sophistication. It is taking that same amount of time in some cases because it just doesn't get it right. It needs to learn. It needs that education. It needs, repeated coaching. The benefit though being when your best humans used to walk out the door, a lot of tribal knowledge used to walk out with them. And now as a founder, think about it, all of that is captured, right? You're retaining this institutional knowledge, you're retaining this context. You don't have to start from zero. And in fact, we could even ask digital workers whose jobs aren't to do that. Can you write a training document on your role for this person that's getting on board? That's this new human that I'm bringing in potentially, right? And so that's really cool. And I think the next layer to that is, okay, well, how many digital workers can anybody manage and how many can I onboard, right? And then what does that look like? So there's a lot of conversation in the market, agent to agent management. And our conversation has really changed from, it's not about volume, but think about it as like sophistication, right? Sometimes you have that college grad, sometimes you've got your MBA, you've got someone who's been in the industry for 40 years, right? Your agents are growing in sophistication. And so then their capabilities grow alongside of that as digital workers. And so the scale unlock, like making the investment now, I think is going to have a tenfold result, a year out that is difficult to measure because it's no longer only a cost conversation and overhead. It is how do you value time saved? How do you track time saved? What do you do with the time saved with the humans, right? How do you redeploy that and put that to work for your business in meaningful ways?
One of the things, or at least a couple of aspects that I think often get overlooked because we kind of take it for granted when we're dealing with humans, is that of memory and creativity. How do you address that with digital workers?
Yeah, I mean, being in marketing, I will say I have yet to believe that creativity is a strength of any of the AI platforms out there. But the memory is paramount, right? And there are pros and cons to that. As you, again, grow and scale in size, the enablement effort that you make as a business when you make changes, you now have to do that like a little extra intention, right, with your digital working team, right? You have to make sure memory is crawled and that things that you don't want to be there anymore, you know what I mean, are taken back. But the repository of being able to go back in history as far as it existed is pretty impressive. And to help synthesize, right? What that trajectory was, what the experience for the business was, where the pitfalls were. Like it's more than again that they're just doing that work. They're able to read back to you, insights that are just harder, I think, to grasp if you weren't intentional about measuring them, right? So the memory is incredible and powerful. What it comes to though is also, I think what's interesting, this is why the human element, it's really paramount at the center. You want humans who are empowered to use AI, but you also want them to understand, how to, when the right oversight is there, how to make sure that they're giving access to the right systems, creating the right skills, right? There's a lot of opportunity for human error in some of that memory. But the creativity side, it's funny. I've got a couple of writers and designers on my team as well. And there's a conversation about, okay, I don't want to take my job. AI is going to replace us. And I empowered them. And I said, well, where would you like more support and effort in your creative process? And how do you build that in there? And I think each of them individually took different approaches in ways that were meaningful for their role. And what came out the other side now was higher satisfaction in creative roles because they weren't bogged down by maybe production or, heavy writing or grammar edits, right? Some of the things that weren't very fun for creative minded individuals were able to be supported by these digital workers that now have allowed my creative team to have bigger ideas, more space for creativity and innovation, which is only making our work better.
As I understand it, Asymbl generated 5 million in documented productivity impact from digital workers in 2025. And you're projecting somewhere between 8 and 13 million for 2026. Those are significant numbers, but I want to understand the predictability question specifically, because that's what investors and boards are actually asking about. Now, how does adding digital workers make revenue growth more predictable, not just bigger? And what's the underlying mechanism that changes the consistency of output, not just the volume?
Yeah. So we have 3 types of digital workers, right? We have digital workers that are pre-built, a part of our products. We have digital workers that are a part of our services team. So they're actually hired by Asymbl. They're embedded in our delivery department and we deploy them and customers pay for those in service engagements. And then custom digital workers, so sort of open source, right? And so what we found is, one, having, I think from a product perspective, any technology that doesn't have enhancements, right, is at risk for predictable revenue growth and accountability there. So I think having our AI digital workers inside of that is showing stickiness, right, for the interfaces, for the platforms, for the applications, right, for the other integrations that are there, because this digital worker, it's not necessarily replacing those products, it's operating on top of them just as a human would and coalescing the value for the business that way. But from a services perspective, I mean, how many people have struggled in services engagements, people on and off the account potentially, right? Really complex, heavy information, lots of analysis, right? Lots of dependencies, and a lot of room for human error. So by having our digital business analysts, right, deployed in part of these engagements, we are finding more accuracy as human changeover happens, as clients have changeover inside of their own business. We're keeping continuity, information, right? Documentation is stronger. And this is resulting in higher trust and confidence in what we're doing and what we're saying is the next step and the blocker and what we have to resolve to get there, resulting in higher satisfaction, right, for the work, which then for us is increasing, right, revenue from our services department. So just the similar way that the product of digital workers and AI creates stickiness within our own business, it's really been wonderful to kind of see. The reverse of that too is everyone is learning, at the same pace together. So as the digital, because we all operate inside of Slack, I have access to ask these digital workers, what insights or problems or challenges are our customers facing and get surface that. Right? To make decisions about what's the next product focus, right, that we should be after, or, what new innovations, right, should we be thinking about. And so the context and the synthesis of information at scale, I think really helps businesses stay ahead of ensuring customer satisfaction and retention is paramount, as well as then the ability to meet the market, right, where it's headed and innovate alongside of it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, is there perhaps a leading indicator that your hybrid revenue system is producing predictable results rather than occasional wins?
Well, I mean, we're documenting every digital worker and the hours that it's saving, right?
Okay.
For every department. So
Hmm.
we're seeing over 20x ROI by department on average. And I think that that's a pretty big indicator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe Asymbl has deployed over 60 digital workers across 10 different functions in just 8 weeks, as an example. That's a bold pace. I'd rather hear about the one that didn't work than the ones that did. Which digital worker had to be redesigned, shut down, or quietly retired? What happened, and what did that moment teach you about where the genuine limits of this model are?
Not that we've had to retire any, but of course, we have hit some pitfalls, right, along the way. One is understanding and learning new technology that can slow you down. So, especially as we went into the open source and started building some of our own custom digital workers, we wanted to do that with intention and focus. I think what has us lately are capacity constraints, right? By being customer zero and saying we want all of our employees, right, working with our digital workers as much as possible to drive output, that is increasing, usability and consumption, right, across all these platforms, which is increasing growth. And so we're hitting limits, or we are asking these digital workers, right, to go beyond what they were originally scoped for. Like I said, the sophistication, right? We're training them up. And I think just at a pure volume number, the challenge we have is we have agents and digital workers being managed by other digital workers. And so what is that hierarchy, right? What does that management strategy, right, actually look like? And how does someone take control of that? So the pitfalls are sort of, I would argue, more in not necessarily not being able to, well, if you're not designing it for an outcome, most people end up having what we like to call a zombie agent. You get a little distracted by something cool or exciting. Someone pitches you, and you're like, "That's great," but they didn't understand how to connect it to your business, what data it was going to be, around how your team was going to leverage and use it and want to interact with it. And then there's no usability, there's no value.
Absolutely. It's a challenge that every fast growing B2B company faces that I would like to connect to what you're building. As companies scale, their best people accumulate irreplaceable knowledge. How deals actually close, which customer objections come up, in which industries, what the real blocker is underneath the stated one. Most of that knowledge tends to live in people's heads, not in any system. When those people leave, the knowledge walks out with them. How does the process of building a digital worker force, a company, for a company to allow the company to surface such and preserve such institutional knowledge it would otherwise keep losing? And why does that matter for revenue continuity?
Well, great leaders, right, are what power, in my opinion, great businesses. And what make great leaders are not just functional subject matter experts, right, of departments, but they're strategic thinking of actually understanding how things get built, how things get sold, why customers are excited, right, where the industry is going, and are creative, right, are innovative, can be ahead of the market, can be ahead of their competitive set. And so it's hard to replicate that kind of ingenuity and innovation with digital workers. So I say, we're having a talent paradox right now where there's not a lot of people who know how to manage, right, and deliver AI. And what's paramount are these types of humans. They understand business strategy. They understand how to fly the plane while building it, right? Help lead the company, enable and understand the kind of roles and functions that are required. Um, as you're building kind of your digital labor suite and thinking about that, the benefit will be, I think that, great leaders will keep you innovating, and they don't necessarily always have to spend the time understanding, right, the roadblocks of why you do things a certain way or what prevents you maybe from pivoting or changing, right? I think that even, businesses are going to be able to say, oh, we documented this process. We understand, what works from it. We're optimizing it, and it's never going to leave the door, even if the manager leaves, right? Because the digital worker has retained it, and the business now can understand that. And these become intelligent signals, right, for everyone to operate from. And the more intelligent signals you have, I mean, we just can't compute at scale, even if the database can, right? Humans can't even necessarily analyze and find insights in all of that. And so all of this becomes signals that can be mined by digital workers to recommend new solutions or efficiencies or enhancements, right, in the way and how work gets done. That isn't something that I think you always had to go out and find new talent for.
So is there an intentional process of actually capturing a lot of the knowledge and thought processes behind some of our human workers?
Yeah, I mean, we have what we call like the context brain.
Okay.
Everything, right, goes
Mhm.
into here's what we're training in, but then you're learning what is it doing, right? That coaching part of the process is where you can kind of tap into what's going on in the brain of the digital worker. What do they know? What do they understand? Asking it why it makes decisions the way it does, because that's how you can coach, right? And help it improve. And then the benefit of that is, okay, manager in another department starts hiring, working. Well, why isn't this working? Oh, we can ask, right? Kind of our digital labor fleet and say, what suggestions, how can we improve? And bam, right, what has been known in other departments can now be known, at scale. So having, like I said, these digital workers having the access to information that isn't just, you know, here's within your CRM, but here's the conversation that happened. That is how that tribal knowledge is maintained.
Okay. Right. Um, your AI sales development representative, an SDR, is the person whose job it is to find potential customers, get them interested enough to talk to a salesperson that reaches out to prospects via emails, follow-up conversations, etc. At some point, a prospect figures out that they've been engaging with an AI, not a human. What is the actual reaction that you've seen in that moment? And how do you design for that discovery, both to preserve trust and to protect the relationship that your revenue depends on?
Yeah, I mean, trust is a huge value for us. So the very first interaction that you will get from Teddy is he will say, "Hi, I'm Teddy, a digital sales development representative. I'm a part of Asymble's 200 plus digital labor fleet and excited to talk to you about insert information." So moment one, so first introduction, we're transparent that you're engaging right with the digital worker right away. And I think what's important is to give off ramps throughout the process, right? So the moment that somebody might want to now engage with that human, that it's very easy for them to do that, and that you're not forcing them down this path where, right, the digital AI agent is the only solution. So I think that builds a lot of trust and transparency out of the gate and also gives people a chance, I think, to play and validate if what we're saying is accurate. You can ask Teddy any question. You can respond to him with all sorts of things, right? You can kind of test it and see for yourself the technology that we've built for ourselves, which is what we want, right? Because it's our best first proof point. If you can engage with it and be impressed at the end
Uh,
of the day.
Something I've observed about how Asymbl operates in the market is that you're not just selling a product, you're asking business leaders to change a fundamental belief about their workforce, what their workforce is, and who or what does the work of growing revenue. That's a belief changing problem, not just a feature comparison problem. And the way you seem to be solving it is through education, webinars, content, demonstrations, thought leadership, etc. What educational format has done the most to move a skeptical founder from, I'm not sure about this, to I'm ready to have a real conversation? And why does that particular format work when others don't?
Great question. I think that when we're able to be in a storytelling environment, that happens in live events, right? On a stage when you get the opportunity or a webinar, if so be the case, that is the moment when it starts to click, right? That I have to change the way that I'm thinking. It is a complex conversation to shift about, well, what do we mean outcomes and what do we mean defining right digital work and the right work done by the right person? And it looks different for every department, right? And for every business in a lot of ways, because you have your own proprietary ways of how you operate, how things get done. And you need digital workers to culturally adopt to that, right? To be successful. So I find, that said, we've had a lot of great engagement with blogs and thought leaderships too. But the easiest and best course is being able to be live and share the conversation in real time.
So when you're referring to the live conversations, I'm assuming the storytelling is a part of it, but there's also a component of interaction and dialogue that furthers
Yeah.
or cements the story or the impact of the story.
Most are usually kind of like Q&A, right?
Okay.
Scenarios. So being, talking exactly as we are today, right? Like, how did you get there? What did you think about it? What was the process? Things like that. We have found the fact that like, we're not talking about something we didn't do first ourselves. And that goes a long way because we're finding the pitfalls and the mountains that have to be climbed. And when we solve them for ourselves, that's what caused some cultural change that we can help other businesses get to that faster.
In our earlier conversation, you mentioned that before any third party tells a company what to do, the most important thing is helping that company build internal alignment, what you
Mm.
described as an internal charter or center of excellence, because the advocacy that comes from internal alignment drives adoption more sustainably than external pressure. Can you walk us through what that actually looks like in practice? Who builds it? Who needs to be in it? And what does it first produce?
Yeah, if we're, we have to sit down with anyone who reached out. It could be at any level or any function, right? And we really sit around to say, who else in your business has to get bought into this? Who in leadership has to sign off on it? And not necessarily for budget, but so that they believe, right? Like, what is it going to take to help other people in the company believe that you made the right decision, right? By building this digital worker and hiring them, right, into your workforce. And a lot of that comes with sometimes individuals kind of have a myopic role on what we find is a lot of digital workers, they are trained, onboarded, and designed by multiple functions together. It is not just one function or one individual, even though there's a manager, right? It does take a bit larger of a team to think about how it's going to be successfully orchestrated again, so that you're driving adoption and usability, and in turn, showing measurable, proven APIs. So we have found that, when we have starting conversations, we think, great, yep, we'll go build this digital worker. We can absolutely implement that, only to be, a couple of conversations down the line and say, oh, that's not actually what the CIO wanted or what the CFO wanted, right? Or the chief revenue officer wanted. That's okay. So let's get those outcomes, right, realigned. You can still do maybe potentially, right, what the original requests were, but it scales accordingly. So making sure you've got the right business strategy is what's going to drive adoption and success long term.
And who would you say typically needs to own the charter within the organization?
Great question. It's a partnership. I think it has to be IT and then the function that you're hiring the digital worker into. It's impossible to own it either way. So it's IT sales, IT marketing, right, et cetera. And I'll say this, that it's a challenge for IT because digital workers, again, it's a very different way of building and thinking and delivering than, right, what is typical in technology. So there's actually evolution and skill building that both department leaders have to come to and come together, deliver on.
Certainly. I'd like to push everything we've discussed into the context where perhaps most listeners actually live. As someone who's running a B2B software company that raised a seed round or a Series A, meaning they've taken outside investment from investors who expect significant, consistent growth. Let's say they have about 15 to 25 people, no dedicated AI team, no chief digital labor officer. They're probably wearing 4 hats themselves. If they want to use what you're describing to make their revenue more predictable, not just bigger, but more reliable and consistent quarter to quarter, where do they actually start? Not philosophically, but specifically.
Yeah. I think you got to figure out where is your data already living and where is work already happening. We built a digital business analyst, for example, who's actually going in and looking at where are we in our revenue for this quarter? Where is our pipe coverage? What is the risk? Why does the risk exist? when was this data inputted? When was it last, you know what I mean, updated, right? There's a lot of human error that goes on in getting the output of, is the trajectory of my next few quarters on track from a revenue target perspective? And so our digital workers have been able to, get context and access. And again, I say this because they have Slack, because they have access to the customer calls we're having, the system doesn't have enough fields for that, right? And so the context of the system might say this, but the call actually came out and we think we're going to, you know what I mean, have some more headway, or actually the call, there was a change at the business. And so, you know what I mean, what the system says, there's more reliability because there's more context gathering that a digital worker can surface. And so our digital analyst, for example, does an executive briefing across every function of our revenue department, every week, which typically would have probably taken just a normal analyst, you know what I mean, easily 3 weeks to put together on a regular basis, and still struggle to automate, right, without a lot of human conversation. So once you build it, the insights are there and maintained for you to start figuring out where to place your resources and energy accordingly. The challenge is, while you're wearing all 4 hats, it still takes time to build out of the gate. And that's the biggest struggle that I even have, on a daily basis, is how to give it enough time to invest so that it can free me up long term.
Great point there. We're coming towards the end of our conversation, and I know you've done a number of these interviews. What's the question that nobody asks you about building a revenue system with digital workers, where you think, I wish someone would go there because the answer would actually change how founders think about this?
I mean, I think that the big thing for me was we actually rethought our entire go-to-market motion, right? And really thinking about how we did inbound and outbound segmentation and then nurturing along that. It changed a lot as we brought in our digital worker teams and thought about what work could be done by the right individuals. And so one is, you might know the outcomes and the processes you have today might not be, something you just plug into. You might have to fundamentally really rethink how work is getting done to make the most of the output, right, that you could see, and the ROI that is sitting in front of you.
The founder listening to this right now has investors expecting growth, a team that's already stretched, and a revenue target that keeps going up. They've heard this conversation and something has resonated, but they don't know where to put their first step. What is the one thing that you want them to do, not think about, actually do in the next 7 days as a result of what we've discussed today?
I would say write that job description, really sit down and say, this is exactly what I want. And then it'll be much easier and clearer about the right technology, right, to help you get there.
Thank you for this. This has been one of the most practically useful conversations I've had on the show about what it actually takes to build revenue systems that doesn't depend on headcount. So thank you for going to the places that other interviewers haven't. For everyone listening, Lauren is at Asymbl. The website is asymbl.com. You can find her on LinkedIn as Lauren Esposito. I'll have links in the show notes. But Lauren, is there any other social media handle or any other way that you feel that people could best use to get in touch with you or learn more about Asymbl?
Yeah, it's Asymbl, ASYMBL. And so that's us on LinkedIn and on the web. And we're eager just to have a conversation, no strings attached at all. We love talking to people about what's working for us and just being useful. So don't be shy about reaching out if you've got any other questions.
Right. Like I said, we'll include links in the show notes. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, it was wonderful.